is the Sacred Stream radio podcast, and today my guest is the founder of the legendary experience design firm Hot Studio, Maria Giudice, the original hottie herself. Maria has spent more than 3 decades at the forefront of business and design, and in 2013, Hot Studio was acquired by Facebook, and she went on to lead global design teams at Facebook and Autodesk, among other things. Maria's mission today is to build the next generation of creative leaders. Maria is also the author of several books, including Rise of the DEO and her latest with co author Christopher Ireland, Changemakers: How Leaders Can Design Change in an Insanely Complex World. Welcome, Maria.
I am thrilled to be here, Laura.
I am so happy you're here, and I've been really looking forward to this chat we're going to have today. And maybe to start out, we can just do a little bit of a brief history. You have a very dynamic and deep bio, and you do so many interesting things. But you started out as a kid in Staten Island, dreaming of being a famous artist. You ended up in California, creating one of the great design firms, Hot Studio, and was acquired by Facebook, which is like every startup's dream. So you did that. And how did you get from Staten Island to California?
I always like to say everything, I've gone through life with a series of serendipitous, just kind of listening to my intuition. But I like to say that I was like the accidental entrepreneur. I accidentally moved to California. I accidentally founded my own company. I intentionally sold my company to Facebook, but a lot of things just fall into place, like listening to my intuition. I used to really think that I had this sixth sense that I could. There are these like there's this these signals from the universe, and I have this gift of catching those signals and going in that direction. And to this day, I still listen to that intuition that moves, and my curiosity takes me into different areas. So it's that combination of intuition and curiosity that puts me in areas that I never ever would anticipate being in.
Mhm.
You know, I was a diehard New Yorker, Laura. Growing up in New York and going to college, going to art school in New York in the '80s, I really truly believed that New York was the center of the universe, and why would anybody live elsewhere? So, fact that I made it to California
Yeah,
and stayed is still a miracle to this day.
yeah, yeah. Well, in talking about like following your intuition, it and trusting that and letting it lead you, that is really at the heart of your book. This creativity, the idea of being creative and being open and being willing to step out of the box. So I love the title of your book, and because it is an insanely complex world that we live in. And
Mhm.
I'm wondering if you can just start by telling me what is a change maker?
Oh, wow. Um, Getting to the idea of thinking about being a change maker and what skills are needed in today's world. My previous job as a VP of design at Autodesk, I was stepping into a role where I was no lo it was like a different I was at a different level. Suddenly, I was working at the C-suite level, and I realized that there were new skills that were needed that I didn't have, even though I have had a long career as a designer and a design leader.
Mhm,
I was in a whole nother area where I wasn't necessarily making change through the lens of creating products and services. I was really being called to lead change that would lead to cultural change at scale.
mhm,
Autodesk is like was a company, that 35-year-old company that was rooted in very technical thinking, even though that they make products that serve creative people. Their products were very, very technical. And the CEO and the chief product officer asked me to join Autodesk to help make the company become much more people centered,
Mhm.
right? And so that's what that's so I stepped into the role of the change maker without actually knowing what that meant. And
Mhm.
when I left Autodesk and I was reflecting upon that experience, was asking myself, what did I do well and what didn't I do well? And I
Mhm.
realized I was learning on the job. And I got curious and I started interviewing other people who were in that position. And so while I was doing research on this notion of being a change maker, I came across this quote from Bill Drayton, who was the founder of Ashoka, which was a social justice nonprofit. And
Mhm.
he said, people who can see the patterns around them, identify the problems in any situation, figure out ways to solve the problem, organize fluid teams, lead collective action, and then continually adapt as situations change. And so the definition he came up with he not only coined the phrase change maker, but he defined this role, what a change maker was. And when I looked at this definition, it was a mic drop moment for me, because
Hmm.
when you look at this very definition that he has defined, it is really the definition of a designer and what a designer does.
Interesting.
These are the things that designers and creative people do.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so that's when I put together this idea that design equals change and change equals design. I often say nobody hires a design team to maintain the status quo.
Right.
Right?
Really good point. Really good point.
So it's fundamentally a design problem, right?
Mhm.
Solvable through what I say
Yeah.
imagination and metrics. And so I put these two things together.
Yes. And, I it's interesting because, what you're saying in the book is like and in The Rise of the DEO is that, like, these times call for this kind of leadership, and the DEO is the design executive officer,
Hmm.
right? Um, I can I quote you? I'm gonna quote you.
Yeah.
So, Maria's Maria's definition of change maker, and it's a little longer than the part I'm gonna quote here, is change makers are not alphas or gurus. They're resilient, persistent pathfinders measured by the coalitions they build and what they set in motion. And can you talk about how it is that, and why it is we need more creativity in leadership as we enter in this new era?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, because the so when I think about when I talk about design, I am talking about creativity. It's those two things are
Yeah.
together, right?
Yes.
Design is sort of the problem solving arm of creativity. And I also believe that anybody can be a designer. Anybody can activate the creative problem solving sides of their brains should they choose to accept that mission,
Yeah.
right? And when we think about when we think about being creative, when we think about our own brains.
Mhm.
There's two ways to go. There's the neural pathway side of our brain that leads to fear, and when we get fearful, we actually show up as an entirely different person. We shut down. It is, there's no way we can actually be creative or come up with good ideas because curiosity doesn't live there.
Mm.
Or we can choose the pathway of creativity where hope lives. And when we're in that part of our brain where anything is possible, where the higher self lives,
Mhm.
we can be open to new ways of thinking and seeing. And so in today's world, which is so overly complex, we can no longer solve problems linearly at a time. We have one at a time. We have to look at the entire system and the impact of our decisions made on a system. So we have to be thinking a lot broader in context.
Mhm.
Um, we have to understand that risk is an ingredient in solving problems. It's not something to be avoided completely because you would never change if you didn't take risks. So we have to look at risk as an ingredient. We have to not only live in a world of metrics, which is the world that people want us to live in right now. And I always say metrics can give us quantitative reasoning about the what, but it can never tell us the why or the how. So
Mhm,
we have
mhm.
to combine intuition with analytics. And we have to really care and put people at the center of everything we do, right? And all of those things are design leadership skills, creative leadership skills. And when we have leaders who can put people at the center of everything we do with the right intention, you're going to get better results in a world that is so focused on process
Mm,
and metrics, and then not necessarily seeing the overarching benefit uh,
mhm.
that they're providing. Um, so, I did I answer your question?
Oh, yeah. There's a
Fine.
lot there. There's a lot there,
Okay.
and, I that I wanna unpack, and I wanna start with, I love that idea, like, where hope lives.
Mhm.
It's a place where hope lives because and then one of the things that struck me in, the book was you talk about optimism, you know,
Right.
courage and optimism, and because so often optimism gets poo-pooed, It's like, "Oh, you're just dreaming."
Yeah.
But optimism is energy. It's like it's forward movement. It's holding the vision. So I maybe you can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah. Well, oftentimes, I give a lot of talks, and one of the things I like to tell people in my talk is there's no such thing as a finish line.
Mm,
There's no such thing. There is no finish line, right? Everything is circular. Everything keeps going. There's no beginning, no end. So the only measure of hope we have as a leader is progress and the mark that we have made. We leave whenever we move forward, we kind of put a stake in the ground and we leave that for the next person who can pull up the stake and run, right?
mm,
And it's not forward always. It's there's we see this in today's politics, um, and you take two steps forward, three steps back, five steps forward, two steps back. This is just and if you didn't have hope as a discipline, um, then you're not gonna move the goalpost forward because what's the point?
right.
So, you have to be curious, you have to be optimistic. You have to believe that there's a better pathway, ahead so that we can continue to move the goalpost forward.
Mhm.
But we're not gonna get to the finish line. Somebody else will pick it up and then they will keep going. And so and you have to feel satisfied that you've done that with the time that you have on this earth, in this body, in this life. You have to hope that you get to the end of your life saying, "You know what? I moved the goalpost as far as I can, and
Yeah.
somebody else is gonna pick it up, and that's
Yep.
okay."
Yes. Yes, yes. Yeah, I wanted to share this with you. Um, you may have heard this before, but, Frank Zappa, do you know Frank Zappa?
Oh, yeah.
He 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 left the music industry because he said it wasn't creative enough.
Mhm.
Creativity in it had died, and he said, "Business is what's creative."
Mhm.
Being an entrepreneur. So when I think of talking to you today, I was thinking of that thing that Frank Zappa said because it always stuck with me. And it's true. When you're being creative, when you're excited, when you're kind of putting your energy into something and being encouraged and following your intuition, that's where the magic happens. It's
Mhm.
not really quantifiable in a certain way. Yeah.
I 100% believe that business is creative. And, again, the best, if you look at CEOs and you look at if you could think of your list of CEOs that you admire in this world,
Mhm.
will probably find that they have those qualities that I outline in Rise of the DEO,
Yeah.
being a change agent, risk, intuition, systems thinking, people centered. And the last one I like to say, getting shit done. 'Cause you
Yes.
can't, right? 'Cause, vision without execution is hallucination. I didn't say that, Thomas Edison said that,
Yeah.
but, and a CEO has to be creative in coming up with solutions that, are gonna move that goalpost that's appropriate for what they're trying to, accomplish in this world.
Mhm.
Um, but, those that don't use their creativity are probably not the innovative companies that we admire. I mean, they still might exist, and I would maybe define them more as functional companies, but those companies that take risks that are tapping into creativity are, the ones that stand out.
Mhm. Yeah. That makes sense. That makes
Yeah.
sense. Um, well, I have a few different questions or places I wanna go, but one of the things that, it strikes me is that you're describing the future, right? Like the future of business, really. And some of the other qualities of the business that you emphasize is self-care. That was one of the things that stood out to me. So we're moving from this period of time where it's like, working the insane hours and like sacrificing and moving into like valuing yourself and kind of putting on your oxygen mask first to
Mhm.
and before you fix all of the things. Can you
Yeah.
talk a little bit more about like this movement towards that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is hard work,
Mhm.
right? And it takes a lot of resilience. And like I said, it takes courage depending on the change that you're trying to achieve. One of the people that I interviewed in the book was Angela Lang. She's the executive director for Black Leaders Organizing for Communities in Wisconsin. She's an African American woman working in grassroots neighborhoods to get the African American population come out to vote so that they can make change happen in Wisconsin. And you can see that there's a lot of change happening in Wisconsin right now for the better. But
Yeah.
it takes years and years of resilience. And it's not, people think that, people tend to think the election season is every 4 years. No, but when you're in government, it is nonstop. You invest heavily in issues and a candidate. You get people out to vote, and there are winners and losers. So
Mhm.
there's a lot of grief and loss where you put your heart and soul into believing in an issue or a candidate, and they either win or they don't. And then you have to and it's like you pour your guts into doing this work. And
Yeah.
then it's loss and grief, and you have to recover. So you have to go through the grieving process and the loss process, and then you have to kind of get take whatever care you need to go through that. So then you can build the resilience and come back and do it all over again. And
Mhm.
she just inspired me so much because not only does she have this burden of feeling the grief and loss every 6 months to a year, frequently.
Yeah.
She's gotta lead her coalition of people to do the same thing. She
Mhm.
has to go through her own grief, and then she has to activate and motivate the troops on the ground to recognize that progress is messy and it's nonlinear, and you have to hold on to hope. And so that's where I use that model of self-care as an
Mhm.
example. And I have spoken to and seen so many people burn out from this work.
Yes.
And and you and again, you feel so much pressure. This happened to me at Facebook when I worked at Facebook. I felt so much pressure being at Facebook. I was 50 years old. Mark Zuckerberg was 25. Sheryl Sandberg was 10 years younger than me. So I was like one of the oldies in a company full of like tech bros.
Yeah.
So the pressure to deliver and perform was it was so stressful. And I just remember what I went through those 2 years that I was there, where Friday would come and I'd feel a relief, and Monday would start and I'd feel regret. And I couldn't sleep at night and I was checking my phone. And those 2 years, I was not creative. I wasn't positive. I wasn't optimistic. I showed up very differently. And I realized that is just not the way to live your life.
Mhm.
And, eventually I got out of it and moved over to Autodesk where it was a better fit. But so many people live in that world all the time.
Mhm. Mhm.
And not only does it have an impact on their health as they get older, their life will get shorter. But, again, it comes back to how are you going to make the most of your time on this planet, right now in this body? And do you really want to spend a majority of your life in that fear state?
Mm.
So, it takes courage and a lot of self-awareness to realize that, we're all human beings. At the end of the day, we should get back to who we really are so we could do work that matters. So, self-care is essential, and it shouldn't be one of these things that people should poo-poo,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Thank
'Cause
you
I
for
don't know
that.
about you, but I wanna live a little bit longer. I wanna
Yeah.
live longer, happier.
Yeah. And I mean, studies show that, workers who are, feel appreciated, who are supported, who have some flexibility with different things are far more productive.
Absolutely, right.
Yeah.
Again, so, a lot there are these leaders who are not creative, who are following old models, old ways of thinking.
Yeah.
And those don't work in a world like this. Or, like I'm going back to that definition of changemaker by Bill Drayton,
Yeah.
adapt as situations change.
Yes.
There's a great example of how this can be done is because COVID happened in 2020 and the
Mhm.
world shut down.
Yeah.
And it was really scary because nobody had any answers.
Yeah.
And so it was this black swan event, right? And before that, business was so status quo. There was a lot of no, can't be done. Going to take a couple of years. That's not going to, the spreadsheet's not going to, reconcile. Like all of this no slow moving change. And suddenly COVID happened. It's like, guess what? The
Mm.
universe just gave us a lesson here.
Yeah.
What are we going to do about it? And then so it was terrible. COVID was terrible.
Yeah.
Um, but when you think about the silver lining, it forced people to be creative. And suddenly everybody had to reimagine their own business model, like in the moment.
Yeah.
Like people had to work at home. People, schools had to figure out how to move their entire, program online. It
Yeah.
was they had to make changes to adapt to the situation.
Mhm.
And the other thing that showed is the incredible generosity of spirit. People got online and taught lessons for free.
Mhm.
Um, people figured out ways how to have symphonies online. People, there were things that people did that they never did before
Yeah.
because they were forced to have to be creative and think differently.
Mhm. Really good point. Yeah. It did. It will take many decades for us to fully realize the impact that those few years had on our society, I think.
Yeah.
Now, you and I were talking a little bit before we came on air, and we were talking a little bit about um, spirituality and kind of the intersection of you just mentioned, the universe gave us this, and you were talking about how, before you got to California, you're like spirituality, no way. And
Yes.
now, you know, that's changed for you. And we can talk some too about
Yeah.
like what you're doing now, coaching and teaching and really helping shape future creative leaders.
Mhm.
And I imagine some of this, influence is part of what you bring to the table.
Yes. Yeah. And yeah, it's true. I was telling you, like, I grew up in New York. Um, uh, and I still am more of a New Yorker than a Californian.
Well,
With New York, there's a lovely degree of sarcasm and skepticism, especially when it comes to spirituality, especially, um, like I grew up uh, with a Catholic background, Catholic
mhm,
religion. And it's funny because I went to public school, but I had to go every Wednesday to Catholic instruction. Like, we
mhm,
all had to get out of school early and walk to St. Sylvester's Church for Catholic instruction. And I just remember, like, even when I was a kid, asking questions about, like, dinosaurs and Adam and Eve. How did they coexist? And, like, getting, like, really horrible, like, answers. Um, and and also growing up here in Staten Island, and also I was very much as like a woman's liber. Like, when I was in 6th grade, my 6th grade yearbook said that I wanted to be a woman's liber as a career. You know, I used to play softball, and I was like the first. There was 2 or 3 women who demanded that we play on the boys' team. So,
Nice.
like, early on, I was this, like, women's rights kinda thing. And, growing up in Staten Island, it's very Catholic and, very, like, anti-abortion and all these kinds of things, and I'm very, pro-choice.
Mhm,
And so, um and going to Catholic church and going I went to church on Sundays occasionally. It was all about fear. It was all about, "If you do this, you're gonna go to hell," kinda thing. Like, it was like, and so I had this mental model about religion, like it was a mean-spirited, um, exclusive club that didn't really celebrate diversity at all. I had that
mhm,
epiphany very early in my life. Um, and so, like, the idea of, like, being religious, I think I stepped more into being agnostic than a full-on atheist,
mhm.
but I always believed in spirituality, and I didn't connect those, like, I didn't call it spirituality, but again, I remember I listened to my intuition, which is really listening to the universe, right?
Mhm,
And, like, I always felt like there was a higher power, a higher spirit. I was able to, like, access people who have passed on in my life, like, I could still feel them around me, like, I had that capacity.
mhm.
And, but again, like, I did not put those 2 things together because it's like Catholic trauma, right? And then, and so jumping full on to where I am today, once I left Autodesk, that's when I felt like I went through my midlife crisis where I realized that I couldn't deal with the bullshit of corporate America anymore. And I took stock of my life and I said, if I look at the through line of my life, not the career path, but the through line, and I look at the things in life that gave me the most joy, it wasn't necessarily creating the best beautiful websites, although I still am a designer and I love beautiful things. It was the ability of working in a co-creative environment
Mhm,
and helping to motivate and lifting people up to be the best versions of themselves to create the most amazing creative outcome. That was sort of like, I looked and went, that's where I get my life energy. It's like helping others, and lifting them up and making them better, and me just helping them get there. And so that's what got me into coaching. I got curious about coaching. Um, and that led me to spirituality,
Yeah.
because once you get into coaching, you're starting to deal with psychology, you're dealing with the coaching sort of practice, you're starting to lean on subconscious state versus conscious state.
Mhm.
And it got me into sacred stream, where again, I got an intuition. I took a class in shamanic journeying, and then I was like, "Oh, this is interesting. I'm gonna take the next one." And then I kept towing in, and then I
Yeah.
fell in the lake, right? And through that journey, the coaching gave me like a lot of self awareness about my conscious mind. Sacred stream got me really tapped into my subconscious mind,
Mhm.
and how you can use both of those states to help people unlock things in them that they already know, but they can't quite see. And that's what I love about the work with Sacred Stream is that we're relying on our own subconscious state to find answers to questions that we're asking that
Mhm.
are there if we can look for it.
Yeah.
And that led me to connect it all to creativity,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? So it just feels like it's coming full circle for me.
Mm. Yeah, it's so great, and I'm right with you there on the creativity. I always find that when I teach people the shamanic journey or like connecting to this sort of aspect of the self that has is their inner wisdom that can be perceived in whatever way they want to perceive it. They can perceive it as God. They can perceive it as their imagination. But like there is the real start to first of all, creative people take to this like ducks to water.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's just that opening, somehow, we as a society over hundreds of years of, religions that have maybe become too rigid, much
Yeah.
like some business models, right? But and have, been maybe out of integrity at times with power. Um, and every one of them has that problem because they're run by humans. So it's not any one that
Mhm.
wins that prize. That what we're really talking about is connecting to the larger aspect of consciousness and
Okay.
of this however we want to perceive it. But when we start kind of breaking down the walls of that or like opening the doors to that, which is just natural. This is
Yeah.
just our natural inheritance as human
Yeah.
beings. Um, and we develop facility with it. And I mean, Buddhism meditation has been really one avenue of doing that and that has been taught for many, many years. So yeah, it makes it broadens things, it makes things bigger and more interesting, and it's right what you were talking about at the beginning when you said, "I just listen to my intuition."
Mhm.
Like, if everybody could just listen to their intuition like you, what a world.
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
a world.
Well, and then giving people permission, like one of the things about the journeying or the depth hypnosis work, it is giving people permission to exercise the creative side of their brain, right?
Mhm,
And then when they can shut their mind off and listen to their body and go in and they see things like, you know, a purple dinosaur floating through the world and you're giving permission to like get on that dinosaur and see where it's taking you, right?
mhm, mhm,
They get out of it and you can see that they're like that they're like their light a light went off or and they have like this energy that emits from them because they're giving themselves permission to activate that part of their brain and their body. And that's why again I'm sort of like this mantra is like we all have this innate sense.
mhm,
Uh and like connecting it to creativity uh, brings to mind for me, again, going back to that girl in the '80s. I gotta send you the picture of the high hair. I had
love
like,
it.
had the Wendy from Prince and the Revolution look, and the high
Oh,
hair is, like, sprayed a high and over, I
yeah,
had that look,
nice, yeah,
and I was in, art school, And I was a wreck in art school because I felt like, I was even though I studied painting my whole life, I felt I didn't have the self-confidence. I felt like I was the last pick being in that school. I had this one teacher, Professor Don Kunz, a calligraphy teacher,
Yeah.
and I'm like this hard-edged, rough-talking girl from Staten Island that was just a nervous wreck, and I would walk into his class, and it was like a spiritual experience. It was quiet.
Mhm.
We spent 3 hours, writing letter forms, from, old models from, 12th century, 13th century, 14th century, 16th century, looking at manuscripts.
Mhm.
And and, it's probably a lot like piano playing, I would assume, or any kind of instrument. When you're learning an instrument is you gotta practice, you practice, you practice, and then there's this moment when suddenly you get into flow state. It's like being close to God. When you're practicing, and I remember the calligraphy, I really needed that quietness, which is a form of meditation. I'm seeing it now, that
Mhm.
he was my first meditation teacher, and I didn't even realize it. He was just such a calming figure and quiet, was so quiet in that class. And then I practiced, and then suddenly, the letters jump off the page, and I'm in a flow state, and it's like the greatest experience in the world to be in that state of flow, which is exactly what it's like when you're going into that inner guidance,
Mhm. Mhm.
right? So
Yeah.
that's the connection to creativity is that it's it's like when we can get there and we allow each of us to get to that whatever a flow state can exist in anything that you do. It brings you great joy. You are
Mhm.
connecting yourself to that spirit.
Yes. Yes. So it's a channel to that.
Yeah.
And, I'll share with you, I teach a class, I haven't taught it in a while, but called, Art and Spirit,
Mm,
and it's about that. And, I'm a songwriter,
yeah.
but also a writer and, a performer and a singer, and I would say performing came last. In fact, music for me was performing was like a challenge to my self-consciousness.
Okay.
That was, you know, and I learned it, but my happiest state is in those moments of connecting to in whatever it is I'm connecting with. We don't have to define it, but and bringing in that song or that poem, channeling that. And it feels way bigger than me. And I always have recognized it as a gift that while I share this with the world and the world is going to take it, someone's going to be like, oh, that song meant so much to me, whatever it is, that's no longer mine.
Yeah.
But the moments I have in that, what you call flow state,
Yeah.
is absolutely what I live for,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
and what excites me about, like, our part of what excites me about our conversation here is, like, thinking that we're gonna that more and more leaders in business, in politics, across the board, social activism, can think of that as a real thing to be doing. It's really a remarkable future if we do
Which
that.
gives us hope and
Yeah,
optimism, right? And
yeah,
when I look at my kids, I have
yeah.
a 24-year-old son who's graduating Cal Poly as an architect, and I have a daughter who's 21. She's studying art at, CU Boulder. And
Mhm,
I look at her generation where then they're not seeing color, they're not seeing sexuality. There's a whole bunch of stuff that our current generation is afraid of and trying to, like, lock down.
mhm,
If
mhm.
we die, that obstacle's gonna go,
Yeah,
and they're gonna become a different type of leader.
mhm,
And as more women and people of color and differently abled people get to that point of leadership, um, they're going to they're gonna tap into that creative part. Because
mhm.
they live in this world.
Yeah,
And the resistance that we're feeling right now is the old guard
mm,
holding on to power as long as they can because it's inevitable that
Yeah.
that way of working is going to die. But
Mhm.
they are strong, they are holding on, and we're
Yes.
seeing it. And
Yes.
unfortunately, we have to experience it. But
Mm.
I look at my daughter's generation and I'm going, that's gonna be a different type of leader, and they're gonna have more confidence to step into things like they're gonna care about self-care. They're gonna care about creativity. They're
Yeah.
gonna they're gonna question ways of working that people are afraid to do now, unless
Mm.
there's the COVID scare, and then you have to reimagine.
Right, right.
And that gives me
Well,
hope.
I think that is fascinating, and, I think of your daughter's generation and then her daughter's generation,
Yeah.
and it's like, we've been in this response to well, to a lot of things, but it's not just in business, it's in humanity at large. It's absolutely necessary for us as humans to evolve in this way. And, I think it's a little bit of the fight between science and religion or, which has been this kind of classic fight that does not need to be,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, and, where science embraces the experiential
Mhm.
and the experiential embraces the empirical.
Mhm.
One does not negate the other, but
Mhm.
and coexist. I think we see that in physics a lot,
Mhm.
I think like the
Yeah.
double slit theory and all of that. But, that's where we're moving. And if what that is giving us a permission to be in this larger state of awareness and access and recognition, accessing the larger aspects of ourselves and recognition. Yeah, it's really exciting. It's really exciting. And I see you as like, you know, uh, just in talking to you, I really feel how you are doing that with leaders now, like how you're really holding that. Because I don't think just anyone can hold it and, transmit it to
Mm.
someone. But I really feel that you are able to do that.
Oh, thank you.
Oh,
I'm a
thank
work in progress.
yeah. Yeah. And, yeah, and can you talk a little bit about what you do, what your
Mhm.
workshops are and your one-on-one and all of that? Please.
Yeah. Yeah, so kinda getting back to like, epiphany around where I get the most joy is really lifting other people up and helping them be the best that they could be.
Right.
That really, gives me, a lot of joy and energy to helping people. And so I'm an executive coach, but executive is in whatever executive means. I'm an executive coach. I help people who are leaders, but I also believe everybody's a leader. So you define what that means. And I let people come to me. Like I don't really advertise because I don't want to fill my life coaching, 100 people a week. So I keep a very small clientele of people who find me
Yeah.
and usually find me like very timidly on LinkedIn. They'll be like, I saw your talk on da 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 podcast and you said you're a coach and oh, I don't know if you would take me. And I'm like, here's my link, let's talk, So, right? Because it's very much about, again, making this connection. It's like, well, if it, let's talk and let's see if there is some energetic connection between what you're looking for and what I could provide. And
Mhm.
then I work with people. I feel like I have like a pantry of things,
Yeah.
like so some people we know can never drop into their body. They live in their head and which is they're not gonna really, grow very much when they live in their head, but it's just based on fear. So, how do I help them understand that that they have a choice, that they could live in this fear state or they can live in this other state and help them to try to kind of like get more intuitive. Um, and, it maybe with those kinds of clients, I'm talking a lot about neuroscience. Like I'm using language that is going to relate to them. They're not going to ever do a DH session. That's okay.
Yeah.
I'll just do a DH session, but I don't put them under a meditative state. I just like, like,
Yeah.
imagine this part and that part. Let's just like, like, so I'll use
Yeah.
language, kind of do the same thing.
You're
Um,
creative.
yeah. And then, some people go right to the depth hypnosis.
Mhm.
Um, and some people, it's like a combination of like Enneagram work. I really love the Enneagram.
Mhm.
Um, and just good old fashioned coaching. Um, just what do people need? And how do I get them to have a degree of awareness about themselves so that they can make better choices?
Yeah.
Uh, I also am really aware, it's really interesting. I'm 61 now. And last year when I turned 60, a lot of people in my life died. Uh and uh Many of them, majority of them were under 70 years old.
Wow.
So you hit a certain point in your life, your parents die, and that's really traumatic, as you know. But when your friends and peers start dying, you
Mhm.
start thinking very differently about your own life.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
get, it suddenly becomes really clear. Oh, I'm that age and
Mhm.
anything could happen.
Right.
And that actually, again, you could choose to live in fear about that, or you can live in creativity and say, "Oh, well, if I got 20, let's say I got 20 good years left, if I could, can how do I make the most of these 20 years? What
Right.
is how can I wake up every day with gratitude and joy
Mhm.
and check myself at the door? Is this something that's giving me energy or taking my energy away?"
That's
And
great.
this own self-realization helps me work with people too.
Mhm.
When I'm like, "Okay, when you're on your deathbed, what are you gonna regret?" And then
Yeah.
like, "Well, then let's not make that a regret now. Let's fix if you're gonna regret this thing when you're on your deathbed, then why not, like, act on it right now when you're in your 40s and 50s?"
Right.
So, again, it's like it's really this I live in a system where I can go into a pantry and pull out things that are gonna be right for right person for the right time, and
Mhm.
I enjoy it. But I have to say, Laura, I am again transitioning because I do wake up every day going, "Is this what I should be doing?"
Mhm.
Uh, I love helping people, but I actually keep hearing the call to be, like, painting and making art, and so I'm finding myself again at this crossroads where I'm like, "Okay, if I say yes to this, I'm saying no to this," and so
Mhm.
how I'm really trying to figure out how all of this is going to work for me now as I step
Mhm.
into the next decade of my life.
Yeah. Oh,
How
that
about
makes
you? I'm curious about you.
me and
And creativity, because I know that you, are a singer-songwriter, musician, and you do this work, but, like, how do you reconcile that life with this life? How do you make it work?
yeah, well, I left that life, I left that life in a way. I was around we're about the same age. So
Yeah.
I was around in the 90s, when it was like startup, and my friends were creatives and they were also artists, they were also in tech. And so there was a real thing there. But what I found was it was very heady and there was a lot going on, and there were a few natural reasons why I moved away from it, including a loss that really threw me into this work. But, I've always been drawn into this work, and I recently saw a professor of mine, who was my humanistic psych teacher, and I realize now that's what I'm doing in
Mhm,
writing the depth hypnosis book, and his class was so important to me. But now, on that point, um, I never, I maybe didn't. I continued writing and playing
mhm,
music and singing. Those were all things that were very healing to me. They were like therapy for me.
mhm,
And I think similarly to you, I was drawn to helping people
Mhm.
and to articulating it in a way that could be understood, where people could relate. So it's been, an honor in many ways to do this work. Yet the call of the creative is there. And I've been feeling it more and more strongly in the recent years. So I'll back up and say, like Frank Zappa said, this is all creative and I love working with my team and I love solving the problems of that COVID brought us and, you know,
Mhm.
innovating but writing and being in that temple, you
Mhm.
know,
Mhm.
and, coming back, I've had the opportunity to actually come back into music in a way that I'm trying to digest, I would say, you know,
Yeah.
and, I'm not sure what that means, and similarly to you, it's like, am I performing more? Am I gonna make a record? I have some songs I'd like to put out. So, yeah, but I do feel that it's important that, like, I'm coming back at it not the same person I was.
Mhm.
You
Mhm.
know, the same and yet with a lot more, understanding and more grounded and all of these things.
Yeah.
So that was a maybe a long answer, but,
No.
it's a big thought.
We're at the same point. I mean,
We are.
when I always I always stayed close to the art part of me,
Yeah,
up until the time my first son was born. And
yeah.
when my son was born in 2000, something had to go. And
Mhm,
so it was the art because I had my career as a CEO, I was building my company, I was supporting my family, and
mhm.
now I have 1 kid, and then I have 2 kids. And then my company grew to
Yeah,
80 people, 100 people. It was a lot of people. I couldn't believe it. I can't believe it myself. I
yep,
got a degree in art. Who
yeah,
think go figure. But that went away. That piece was put on a shelf, and that was 2000, and here we are in 2024, and
yeah.
I'm just over the last couple of years, I'm inviting it back in, but
Mm,
it's a constant tug for me where,
yeah,
because, one side of my brain is helping others. The art is about helping me, is like, it's about, it's like, it's like helping me. As I always say, like, there's problem solving and problem finding.
yeah,
Art is a lot like problem finding,
yeah,
like you're
yeah.
seeking when you make art. And so it's very different sides of my brain. And I feel I'm still trying to figure out the best way to bring those two things together. So that's kind of the transition that I'm going through myself right now.
Mhm. Yeah, and that makes sense, and, what I will say to that is at least for me, is I like having the variety. There's something about, like, I could never just not do what I do with Sacred Stream, but, for me, the podcast is really creative,
Mhm.
and I get to engage with really interesting, creative people who are doing really great things in the world, and I would but I don't have to do, what all the busy work of it is like, "Oh, no, we've gotta fix that problem." So I think what I've been slowly doing is really trying to let go of some of the stuff that I don't have to do, which is
Mhm.
can be hard. But always having I feel like having that diversity, like you said, like, if you're painting and you're dedicating yourself to that a certain amount each day, it's gonna feed the other things that you're doing and will
Mhm.
probably inspire you
Mm.
and give you further information about what you need to do and how you need to do it, right?
Well, you better get that class going. I got to take your class.
Alright, I will. I will, I will. So what does the future hold? Do you are you or we've kinda covered that a little bit, but what do
Yeah,
you
I
see?
think I have more questions than answers about the future. Again, I think I feel like I really do wake up with gratitude.
Yeah,
It's like, okay, I'm breathing, I am standing, I
yeah,
can go out in nature, I can, I may not be rollerblading on the street anymore, But, there's certain things that, I could still do, but uh, I am trying to figure out how to weave these 2 constructs together,
Mhm.
in a way that doesn't feel, such a mind shift.
Yeah.
Uh, and, and also the other thing is saying goodbye to that persona, right? A large part of this is, and I coach people about this, is like, I have a whole business persona. I have a whole story. Said it earlier. Reputation. I'd spent my entire life building this like reputation with integrity, and I'm enjoying the reputation that I have now. Like it's, I think people are like looking at me as a wise elder, and I'm not quite uh, criticized as I was when I was much younger as a leader, but
Yeah.
letting go, having the courage to let go of that persona and say, it's okay. I don't have to be the star in LinkedIn. I don't
Mhm.
have to count how many likes. I don't have to, do this because I feel like I need it for my career.
Right.
That's a lot of the work right there, is just being at peace with letting that stuff go so that you can invite in who you're becoming.
Yes.
That's where I'm at, trying to figure out who I'm becoming.
Uh, I love that.
Channeling
Bringing
Michelle Obama.
Yes. Well, I've gotta have you back on this. We can talk. There's so much. It's such a rich conversation, and I am thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and being here today. And yeah, and I look forward to more talking with you more.
Well, like I said, the honor is pure mine to be in your presence and to have this conversation with you.
Thank you.